got that. Not sure whether it's on, don't know it's on the GFA website at this point in time, but if people want that, they can get that from me. Or do you put it up on the, Geelong website?
Yeah, I put it on the Geelong YouTube website.
Oh, excellent.
That reminds me, everybody, I am recording this session. So if there are people that don't know that you're on this session, you better hide yourself now.
No, that's fine, because I just listen.
Very good, John. Okay, then Chris's talk was a good talk, and it stole a fair bit of my thunder. I'm going to be fairly sporadic and not necessarily terribly organised, because I've been spending a hell of a lot of time on bloody legal issues on the aerodrome. In fact, I've been a great contributor to GFA unless it wasn't for aerodromes and legal matters. First, I'd like to go to the sort of sources of information we've got. We do have a DI manual on the GFA website. Anthony is spending a bit of time at this point to just go through and take out some of the minor issues which came about from putting the 2011 version to the 2016 version, bringing it into the standardised regime of GFA documentation. So that I expect very shortly Anthony will be putting up a mint copy of the current document with some of the typos and few issues and nicely sorted out. But otherwise, the edition current on the GFA website is 2016. The other thing when you get down onto the GFA website is the videos prepared by Justin Crouch up in Southern Cross Gliding Club. Justin is doing a very good job in a range of ways and is really interested in DI work. From my perspective, the videos are good up to a point, but they lose me a bit on one thing I'm pretty keen about, and you're going to have this rammed down your throat by the time I'm finished, which is that we want to start the DI process correctly. We want to deal with the important things first and not descend into detail too early on. They're going to review what the really important things are to assist things being done better, because GFA is certainly interested in the problems of raising a standard of DI around the country. Anthony's revised a picture in the maintenance release, and maybe, David, you can put that up as item number 1. It's the file number 1, David. You can put it up if you need.
Right.
No, numero 1, beautiful. And this is not much of a revision to what's there currently, but it is actually heaps better because it points correctly to, we need to be looking at the maintenance release for its validity, date, no major defects, etc. So step 1's not a change, but it is trying to just emphasise a few things that are important, and why we're trying to emphasise things in step number 1, because the incidents, the SOAR reports are there telling us that people in Australia are making errors in this area, with the frequency which is a bit concerning, such as flying a glider where it's beyond the maintenance lease expiry date. Then when we get into practical detail, trying to make step number 2, and you get down to physical checking to be the absolute starting point. No ifs, no buts, no maybes. And it's been corrected to show there are actually 4 elements to it. A is, the 4, if you're coming up to glide or trying to teach someone about DI inspection, keep in mind it's got 4 parts to it. It is checking the assembly and safety of the actual structural connections. Then we've got the same issue with the flight and secondary controls, FDV, assembled together and safety correctly. Then we move on to checking the controls by these two different processes, which are restrained and unrestrained, and that's written there accurately. This change, to this sort of revision to this part of the daily inspection regime goes back about 15 years to Gary Sunderland in 2010. I saw it in a technical committee report where Gary said, we've got to reduce the incidence of problems of gliders taking off with controls disconnected and all this sort of stuff. And in that, he went right back to the very original national gliding school, or one of the early national gliding schools conducted in Adelaide. And in that, they determined that one of the things which is most important to start the daily inspection by checking that it's rigged correctly. So you might think it's new. It's not. It's been the basic understanding of things for 40 plus years, 50 plus years. And I've been trying to promote this in my gliding club, following Gary's lead for about 15 years. And I would say, regrettably, that I view it as being only moderately successful in bringing the bleeding obvious to people's attention. And I still see people and have to remonstrate with people who want to be checking the controls by restraint towards the end of the daily inspection. You've all been involved in this. I don't know if there's anyone out there who hasn't been involved in the steps A, B, C, D, and the parts A to D under step 2, and I won't go through those. They're explained in more detail in the daily inspection manual. When you've got someone there to help you with controls, checking by restraint, then step 3 simply says practically have the person help you do the other things, which are 2-person checks. And after that, we can go into 4, where we actually go into some of the detailed sort of stuff. There's a drawing of the glider on the next page underneath this first page, and it's pretty much the same one. Yeah, and it's about as good as you can do for a representation on a 2-dimensional piece of paper. But the reality is that gliders are 3-dimensional objects. They've got a top of the wing, under the surface of the wing. They can be positioned in various ways to make them inspectable. I mean, I had a person with limited mobility who had his own Blannock, flew his Blannock happily. He couldn't get underneath the tailplane of the Blannock to inspect it. So we arranged that when Bruce wanted to DI his glider, the tail of the glider is put on a drum. He could then get under it easily. And so the glider can be manoeuvred to make it inspectable. And some people may need that. The way it's drawn here tends to say start in the cockpit and work around. Well, yeah, I don't think it's a perfect answer as to order, accepting that you personally have to come to a process which you use consistently. For me personally, I started the wingtip, work along the top surface to the wing root. I then go back to the tip, go underneath that wing. If it's a very broad wing, I will break the wing, like a Pukat's has a very broad wing root. I'll break it up into leading edge to main spar, top surface. And I'll do from the main spar backwards as trailing edge along the top of the wing. Then I'll go underneath. Of course, underneath I can do the whole surface from tip to root in one go. I don't need to have 2 goes. Of course, in long span nimbus, the wing chord at the root end is pretty narrow, so it's a single pass on the top. I do one wing, I do the other wing. Then I move along the fuselage from the trailing edge of the wing along one side of the fuselage. I work down to the back end. I work my way up the side of the fin. I do the tailplane and go around the other side of the fin, and I work down along the fuselage on the starboard side. I then move underneath the wing, looking at the wing root tapes and that sort of stuff, but more importantly, move on to the undercarriage. I move along the fuselage underneath, looking at canopy hinges, belly releases, up to the nose, look at the nose, and then I eventually wind up in the cockpit. And that's the process I use. If someone is using this check sheet here and following it by going to step 5, and some of it can lead you to jump from one position on the glider to another position, and not really in a very orderly fashion. And I've seen people daily inspecting, going all over the place, and that just tells you they don't know what they're doing. This checklist here is not a do-and checklist. It is a checklist to be used after you've finished inspecting to just sort of step back to the glider, have a look at it from the distance, have a quick glance over these things to see that, yeah, I've covered these matters. The other thing is that we're not invited to take the glider apart with screwdrivers to get into access panels and dive inside. We're involved in inspecting what's in front of us. And so you can actually make what is in front of you be the checklist. I break the cockpit up into 3 steps. We've got the starboard side of the cockpit interior. I work along that, and what is in front of me is the checklist. I do the port side, fuselage, interior wall, starting the back, moving forward, and what I'm looking at is the checklist. And then I move down the centre of the cockpit area with straps and cushions and absence of rubbish under cushions and so on. Anyway, that's what I want to say about that. What I will do is, you might take that down, David, and people might have put them with my face. What I think I will do is dive out of full screen, and I'll pull up something for me which I'll speak to. Yes, look, I'll go through daily inspecting issues which come out of sail planning gliding. Starting in 2011, they publish incidents in every edition of sail planning gliding. Some of those are airworthiness related, so I've consolidated those. And we can have a bit of a laugh about the ponds because, boy, they stuff up. But of course, they do a lot of flying, so that on a percentage basis, then they may be not too bad. But this record is pretty striking. And I'm going to read through them. K8, taking off. The turtle deck came off during winch launch. The pilot had been distracted during the DI and omitted to secure the retaining nuts. DG 500, small hole found in rudder during DI. The rudder stop was found to be missing, allowing the elevator to touch the rudder. And this is a possibility with DG 505, DG 1000. The rudder stops at the base of the rudder can involve the lock nut loosening off. LS4s, like in Geelong Gliding Club, UKA, only one air brake open on final approach, which then stayed fully open, leading to control problems and an undershoot landing in a field with crops. The other air brake was found to be unconnected. Pilot blames interruption during rigging for the oversight. So here again, distraction, interruption during the process, and you got to think about that hard. I know that at this site, which was run by Tom Nauf, one of the absolute stars of American gliding, with and particularly ridge flying, at that site, you are not to disturb anyone doing daily inspection, not at all. If you got disturbed, you actually had to start again. Anyway, K21. Mobile phone heard ringing within the structure during DI, found underneath the seat pan. glider just returned from being displayed at a local show where the public were invited to sit in the glider. Well, someone got a free mobile phone. But there's always objects in K-13s which can, some of the gliders with sort of steel tube fuselage, maybe Anthony's bird falk, that can lose objects around the cockpit area, sometimes with unhappy consequences.
The worst sound in the universe is the person sitting in the front seat unintentionally emptying their pocket of change as it rattles down to the bottom of the fuselage.
Well, you need a collection tin. Make a profit, mate. K6, the glider was misrigged and flown with only one or two rear supporting lugs securing the tailplane. You'd think you couldn't do it, but someone managed to achieve that. So the tailplane was actually was tilted with regard to the fin. It's my understanding of the way it would look. It says here, the forward attachment bolt was properly secured and the tailplane resisted movement when physically checked. The rigging pilot did not visually check the mounting points. It's pretty breathtaking to me, but there you go. Poor donor inspection. Both in regard to duplicate checks of the rigging, assembly and rigging of things. K-13, rudder travel restriction noticed in flight. Recent repositioning of the front stowage pocket allowed the mounting bracket to restrict rudder movement. Nothing was noticed during the DI, etc., etc. KSX, drag pin inserted incorrectly with the handle, not the pin, through the bushes. The error was missed at DI and not noticed until the glider was being de-rigged after several flights. So you got multiple DI people who failed the bleeding obvious. PERCOS, split pin that should have secured a clevis pin in the rudder cable linkage found to be missing. Another split pin securing a clevis pin was found not to have been folded back. It could also work loose, so that in the really small detail stuff, you can find matters of issue, particularly something maybe out of annual inspection. Pick 20 here. Pilot bailed out a glider at top of winch launch at 900 feet or so. Rain interrupted the pilot as he was rigging the tailplane, and after taking shelter, he returned, resumed his normal pre-flight routine, and towed out the launch point. After fast launch, pilot realised elevator not attached. And in that regard, we've had a fatal accident here in Australia generated with a Pick 20 sailplane. I purchased the trailer from the deceased estate. The pilot didn't die from flying the glider with the elevator not connected. That happened on a Saturday. He survived by using a flap as a substitute to help him with pitch control. He died the next day when he was sitting in the cockpit, demonstrating to people who were around the cockpit how he had just prior to takeoff, how he'd manipulated the flap to escape the problem which he had on Saturday. The problem was he left the flap in excessive positive setting and the winch launch was catastrophic. As to CS-77, the pilot was getting into the glider after being delayed by a rain shower, but when a helper wiping the raindrops off the glider noticed the tailplane was not properly attached. So the pilot's the DI was hopeless, and the pre-flight walk around, which we do sensibly, again failed to detect the obvious, or what should have been obvious. Quite a lot of issues also with loose batteries. I was amazed at this actually. Ventus B, loose battery opened and jammed an air brake. Post-flight inspection showed the battery had not been properly secured before flight, but we'll come to some more telling ones than that. K8, wing centre fairing came off during aerotow takeoff. Pilot distracted by visitors during DI, admitting to refit the wing nuts which secure that. etc., etc. And you think people, you know, can't get it wrong. This one, Antares, which is 20-metre span, self-launching electric-powered gadget, really schmick gadget. The self-launch glider was climbing through 400 feet after takeoff when a radio call informed the pilot that he had attached only one of the wing outer sections. The 20-metre glider is hanging under dust covers in 18-metre mode. The pilot feels that in his hurry to get airborne before conditions deteriorated, he meant to fit the starboard wingtip. As a sole owner, the pilot is used to finding his glider in the condition he left it, and he suggests these pre-flight checks may not have been as careful as they could otherwise be. He also pointed out that, you know, as a self-launcher, there's no launch point helper to point out the emission. I mean, really, but it's this is a bit like a comedy session, except in more comfort. I'll try and pull us back to Australian reality shortly.
Roger,
Yeah.
how big are those tips?
Well, it says he hangs it under dust covers in 18-metre mode, so it's just the wingtip section with his winglet is probably about, you know, a metre or something other, quite modest. So the glider should have been controllable. In fact, obviously was controllable, but not too smart. But I think somewhere buried here is going to be one where someone takes off in a STEMI motor glider again with one wingtip, one outer wing panel missing. And labels, this one I found particularly interesting about labels. Wing flutter during flight with one aileron control disconnected. Positive control checks had been done before flight. On inspection, it was discovered that the spring-loaded connecting pin could latch into an indent at the end of the control push rod rather than the rod end bearing. Now, it's well known in Australia that you can fail to connect the label push rod into the fitting in the fuselage, and the push rod can rest under the downgoing weighted aileron in the opening for the fitting in the fuselage, and with a very slow movement of the control column, you'll get correct behaviour of the aileron. But if you move the control
you're shaking your bloody.
if you shake the control column, it all falls apart. Here we got this halfway state, which I've never heard of before, where the pin, the spring-loaded pin has been pulled up, the rod end has been partly pushed in, and the spring pressure's down, but not through the hole. Anyway, we'll keep rolling on. The Olympia glider crashed, overturned and destroyed after taking off with elevator disconnected. The group of 6 pilots and 5 gliders were visiting another club as part of Club's Vintage Week. Glider had been rigged the evening before by the group as a whole without any single individual taking responsibility. There's a key point. Someone needs to be in charge of rigging the glider, and someone else needs to do a separate and genuinely independent check on the rigging of the glider after that's done, and both need to sign for what they've done. There were no positive control checks done on the elevator, no independent rigging checks, and on the day of the flight, no DI was performed, etc., etc. Yeah. Anyway, that destroyed that glider. ASW-20, despite carrying out positive control checks, it was discovered that after the second flight of the day, the starboard flap was disconnected. The pilot was new to the syndicate and still learning the glider, so you need to know your glider. And each glider has maybe 2, 3, 4, 5, 8 special elements which you need to know. The focus series, particularly the rigging of the wings together. I'll roll on a bit more. Time's okay. Cirrus, pilot distracted during rigging, forgot to insert the main spar pin. The pilot taped the wing fuselage gap, towed the glider to the launch point, where he realised the mistake after noticing the main pin sitting on the seat in the cockpit. I think it might be actually the original Cirrus, not standard Cirrus, like the original 17-metre Cirrus. And maybe each wing is like standard Jantar and the bells and things where there are pins on the end of the stubber spar, which means that you can bring the wings together and hold them together. And it's just got a simple central main spar pin, fairly lightly loaded, quite small. K13, here we go, batteries again. Loose battery came out of its container during a simulator winch launch failure. One end of the restraining strap was not easily visible during DI and had been left unfastened. Well, I had to question why the hell are you using a restraining strap? You actually need a physical object, something relatively rigid to hold batteries down, not just pieces of strapping. K21, ballast weights came loose during a simulated launch failure. The weights and attachment bolt were believed to come from Slicer, but comparison with known factory parts from another club revealed the weights to be 2mm thicker and the bolt to be 20mm shorter than factory parts, leaving barely enough thread to secure the weights. This is really more in the area for an annual inspector to pick up on and question whether the securing of ballast weights is in fact in good order or not to be caught out by using non-standard, non-factory parts. And in that regard, do understand that you can buy nylock nuts cheaper from Shemperth than you buy them from Bunnings. Shemperth and company are really good on selling some of this hardware to use split pins and whatever. That's where I get my stuff from. Don't charge you much, mainly the packing charge, the irritation, but there are good sources of common garden parts which you do need, and you should get perhaps an organised club level to get 100 nylock knots in and distribute them around. Pirat, a nice polished single seater which Spirimali used to fly. It's probably somewhere around the back smash aerodrome in a trailer. Incorrect weight limit marked on cockpit placard. During reweigh, it was discovered the previous weighings had used incorrect forward and aft COG limits, leaving placard minimum cockpit weight being 50 pounds less than required to keep CG within limits. Excessive reweighs has carried forward incorrect data. This one's really more about annual inspectors and staying smart as an annual inspector and not accepting what the work that's been done previously as being valid. Cirrus again, elevator became disconnected during Aerotow ground run.
Okay.
The new owner rigged the glider, third time rigging this glider. There were 2 experienced pilots. Independent rigging check and positive control check were carried out. During takeoff, pilot for elevator control didn't feel right. On inspection, the elevator was seen to disconnected. So that serves a suggestion for improving the visibility of control connections, including remove the small perspex inspection window and painting the elevator connector white, so that there's situations where we have problems, and they sort of came up with a few ideas on the day or shortly thereafter, but there is a follow-on action where people with daily inspecting situations or annual inspectors need to realise we actually need to get over the backside and fix these things once and for all time by making improvements which are justified in an engineering sense. I'll come back to that with LS3 and show you some photographs of a very nasty situation with LS3 and what we did to fix it. Pick 20, again, flight with elevator disconnected. Pilot didn't carry out positive control check after rigging. They did check the controls were moving in the correct sense. Suddenly with the elevator, and same in OSW20, the pushrod comes up underneath the elevator. The weight of the elevator simply pushes the elevator down on top of the pushrod. You don't need connection from the cockpit. You move the stick back, the elevator goes up. you move the stick forward, it goes down under gravity. Yes, it had no elevator control. Was still able to control the glider in pitch using the flaps and by leaning forward. It's a bit like Dick Johnson got himself out of a spin in America by unlatching the harness and moving his body weight forward, because that's what it took to get the bloody thing out of the spin. Yes, K7 glider crashed and became inverted after failing to roll out of a low-level turn. Long story. Ballast weights for this glider were fit on top of the pilot's seat and secured to steel tube frame and strap anchors. The pilot had checked that the weights were secure and well clear of the controls before putting a cushion on top and getting into the glider. After the crash, it was noticed that the securing rope for one of the weights had severed. If the rope had broken early in this flight and the weight slid forward, it may have impeded controls. The club intended to ensure ballast weights were securely bolted to the glider. We've got a bit better because lots of our gliders come these days with ballast weight pockets and proper ways of anchoring ballast weights, either up the nose or down the tail end. We've still got some gliders where lightweight people like me, have to tie in some ballast. And it's GCV have done something towards having a approved scheme, courtesy Mike Burns, for actually properly tying in ballast weights for the glider. But you need to look at the ballast weight security situation. Alan Patchen came back from United States of America, where he spent a couple of years on the General Dynamics F-111 program prior to taking delivery of F-111, and he flew with a Texas Gliding Club and knows that a young pilot survived a flight in a Schweitzer 126 single-seater where the ballast weight on the seat slid forward. It held the stick forward. The glider executed 2 outside loops, and during the second of the loops, it went down between 2 hangars. As it came up the last time, the ballast weight slid back, and he regained control. So I'm not running out of war stories, but I'm just trying to illustrate that while these things are infrequent, you know, they are happening, and they're happening in Australia, and we are trying to lower the frequency of these. I mean, I don't know if we absolutely can eliminate them, but we can do better. We're doing better in the past. We've still got to do better again. Part of the issues in England, which are coming out from what I'm reading to, come because they have a very high proportion of private owners. The private owners, by and large, very frequently may not have their gliders in hangars. They might actually rig on a daily basis out of the trailer. So they really want to, rig, get on with flying. And so I think they've got a higher incidence of, higher occurrence rate of rigging their gliders prior to flight, whereas we have gliders and hangars and rig and de-rig very occasionally. But, it just rolls on. Here's this Jantar. This one's for you, Dave. You'll love it. Wings fell off during landing ground run. The pilot was distracted during rigging and failed to insert the spar pin, a mission which went unnoticed during the DI. After 40 minutes of soaring aerobatics, the pilot heard the wind noise increase and saw a gap between the wing root and the fuselage. Realised what happened, he opened the air brakes, flew gentle approach, etc., and managed to get it on the ground. But on touching down, the wings fell away and the tips hit the ground.
Yeah, Wayne and I have both managed to do that. It's pretty
easy. Specialising in Pagays, air brake control not connected. This is all about hotelier couplings and checking them by feel. Well, you need positive control check for one thing, but also you might need to get a torch and into the the opening in the standard cirrus fuselage and actually check them under, a light provided by a torch.
Roger,
Yep.
one thing I've noticed on vintage gliders, people aren't checking the tension of the aileron cables. And now I can only say anecdotally, I can't say for certain, but I've had other people say to me, oh, don't like cookers because you get flutter on them. And that's because they hadn't checked the cable tension before flight.
Yeah, we've had a very nasty event where Bill, the long-time instructor at Benalla, Bill Schoen, person became Bill Simpson, who was well experienced on short wing kookaburras, knew intimately that each winter, it started into each summer, and the start into each winter, you had to adjust the aileron tension, the cable tension, because of the way that steel expands in the heat, contracts in the cold, and the wing spar works the other way with changes in moisture.
One thing I did to address this is I've written in the front page of the maintenance release that every 3 months or so the cable tension must be checked. So if somebody else does DI the glider, there's an extra entry in that front section of the maintenance release to say check the cable, which obviously needs to be signed off by date.
Then you have a really good idea there, Lee, which is to try and think beyond the minimums, because there's nothing in the kookaburra documentation I know of that tells an annual inspector to do something intelligent like that. And it points to an area where there are these couple of things with each glider type where you need to have recorded these special considerations, and we'll look at some of them with DG1000 and little discus CS and so on, such that if there are any airworthiness club airworthiness officers listening to what I'm saying, we need to do better. There's an area we can do better, which is in each club's got a fleet. The fleet, will have a number of issues relating to DI, and if you're teaching someone about the particular glider, you need to be sure that you cover these things. Another one, like you're referring to, Lee, is there's nothing with the puckats to tell you to take the tail end apart on a regular basis and grease it. It greatly improves the durability of the rear end, and you can sure as hell not want to get caught up in having to do major maintenance on the rear end of the glider, the way that the tailplane mounts to the fin. You want to put that off as long as possible, and you do that by lubrication.
Well, the GFA, the platypus, we don't ever de-rig it because it's don't have a trailer. And so, again, we have a note in the front cover of the maintenance release to say that the tailplane should be removed and greased, only because it never ever gets removed except perhaps for the annual inspection. And that's it. One other thing I was going to raise, now I know it's on the cookers, but I think it's on a few other gliders, where you've got a trim tab on the elevator, it is a U bracket with a pin. So when you rig it, the bracket should go on top and in the middle. If it goes top or bottom, because it's spring loaded, you can adjust the trim control and it'll work. And so the trim tab will go up and down because it's spring one way and push the other way. But of course, the only way to make sure it genuinely is connected, because you can't see it without actually lifting the tailplane up. So you've really got to hold the trim tab as against the elevator and try with some mild force on the trim control.
If you'd like to detail that to me, I'd like to see it in detail.
Yeah.
Be neat, like photo or two. And
You've got the idea that you've got, there's other couplings in other aircraft, I know, where you've got a U bracket and then the driving mechanism is inside the U bracket. And therefore, when you move that, everything moves because it's pushing against the U bracket. But if you happen to rig it and that sits at the top or sits at the bottom, it's only because there's a spring on the tab does it actually look like it operates. But of course, it can freely move if it's not correctly rigged. But look, I'll send you a diagram. That's fine.
Appreciate it. Then,
Yeah, I can confirm that because I've seen that happen on GFK when we rigged it one time. Now there are two other things, Rog, I'd like to respond to in the
go for it.
litany of disasters you've told us about. The first one was the ballast issue, the fixed ballast. People may not be aware that in Australia we were not required to have fixed ballast in the glider until 1975, when a terrible accident occurred. Up until then, we just put slabs of lead under the seat and flew if we were too light, which I was, of course. You know, by that time I'd been flying for 12 years. All of my training was done with loose ballast. I sat on loose ballast under the seat.
Wow.
It's a really, really good thing now that we ensure that the ballast is fixed in the glider. Sometimes it is tied in, but heck, check that is secure and that they're not frayed ropes you're using. The second thing is the dual check. Now, in the data inspector's handbook, it says that after a rig, we must always have a dual check. In the BSE, it says after a rig, we must always do a dual check. In the MOS 3, there is a let-out clause for people who have gliders with self-connecting controls. You are not required to do a dual check. Now, I only became aware of this because of the command pilot flight review exam that is now online, where I gave the wrong answer to one of the questions by saying that at all times you needed to do a dual check after a rig. It turned out to be wrong because 5 years ago, the GFA inserted in the MOS 3 that if you had a glider with self-connecting controls, you did not require a dual check. And given the things you've told us, Rog,
Yeah,
why on earth do we not have to do a dual check on your wings and your blooming tailplane? You know, whether the glider has self-connecting controls or not.
it's very vexing, Jenny. And the problem the GFA has had is that some people, the later series motor gliders, can take them to a remote location, self-launch, and there may be no one there who's really capable of performing an independent check on such. My friend Neil Burns with his one-man rigging Ventus 2 and the beautiful one-man rigging trailer, an absolute work of art, is fully independent. And so the GFA has been caught in having to provide for a compromise, and it is a compromise. Apart from that, we do have Anthony online, and I can hide behind him. Anthony might care.
I was waiting for the duck and cover there. Yes, there's been quite a few conversations this week because of Jenny's observations, and there isn't an immediate solution at the moment. So I don't have an honest answer for it at the moment, Jenny. Other than that, we are looking at the issue again. It comes down at any level. It comes down to your level of professionalism. I don't feel comfortable flying an aeroplane that has not had an independent inspection on wing connections, control connections. There are other people out there who do feel comfortable, but in terms of what I feel comfortable with, I will always insist on my aeroplane having a dual inspection no matter what. I would encourage others to adopt the same sort of attitude. It's all I can do at the moment, and we'll look at what we can do about the rules and how we define them over the coming weeks.
The other thing to be kept in mind is that many times Neil Burns would be in a situation maybe flying somewhere and he could take his own glider out and he's the only person going to get on board that glider. In the club situation or the commercial operation doing training flying, people can be DIing and signing out where someone else will fly it. And the consequences of things going wrong, falls upon the other person, which is where it all gets much nastier in law.
Yeah. One of the things that came up around about that time 5 years ago was this huge discussion on independent inspections for daily inspections. And I put forward the idea that the independent inspector could waive the second check, the independent check, providing they signed in the DI book that they were going to take legal responsibility for their actions. So that went to a vote at the RTOA meeting, the annual get-together we had at the time, and it was narrowly defeated, roughly 51% to 49%. But I'm quite comfortable with people taking responsibility for their actions, providing they sign for it in the logbook or the DI book. Because that's essentially what you're doing when you sign on the dotted line. You are taking legal responsibility for your actions. Now, if you're only going to go and hurt yourself, well, that's really your problem. But where it comes down to the potential for hurting others, particularly if you're flying and going to let other people fly an aircraft that you DI'd, yeah, different kettle of fish, that one.
Okay, well, I'm going to move on to a series of photographs which I've put together. So, David, you'd like to put up the item number 3, which is about daily inspection right, wrong photo pairs. This little effort is experimental, and
Oh, sorry, item 3, was it?
yeah, item 3, beautiful. So I've been out there taking some photographs, trying to produce some pictures which show when things are right and when things are wrong. I find in assembling it into a document last night, this morning, that some of the photo quality is not quite there. But basically on the left, because we've got an idea which is towards daily inspector refresher training, some which may be conducted by going through a series of right and wrong questions, just to see where people are at in terms of the ability to observe things. We can't always get out to an aircraft, and also we're not really empowered to do some of the things I've done here, which I've disturbed the safety of the glider, taken the photograph, put the item back to where it should be, and had someone deputy inspect the what I've done in re-rigging the glider, try and keep my nose clean, but I need some photos. The left-hand one shows complete absence of a safety pin, which is wrong. The next one shows, but the picture's not especially good at this scale, that the safety pin is present but not safety. So we roll on to the next page, Dave. Yeah, again, it's trying to capture, go back one step. Again, it's trying to position the safety pins at, you might be able to observe that it's not correct on the right-hand side, and it is correct on the left side, but I've really got to lift my photographing skills. Anyway, you can work away at that. Next one, Dave.
I can't see the difference.
Next page, yeah.
Sorry, I'm still getting used to this Macintosh.
And you only have got control, have you? Yeah, you've got control. That's okay.
Excuse me, Dave. Is it possible to zoom in on those pictures that you're in, please?
The answer is I don't think so,
Okay,
or only to a limited extent.
right.
I just did.
The question is pretty obvious. Which situation is correct? And blind Freddy can see that what is on the right is correct. But notwithstanding that, in a litany of English problems, someone has been out to the flight line with a geodiscus with a tailplane like this. Fairly naturally, the consequence on trying to take off was the leading edge flipped up, the tail rose, the nose got pitched down, and the launch was aborted. But you really look at it and think, how could they get through daily inspection? How could they get through a pilot's pre-flight walk around? Well, it did on this occasion. So even Mr. Schemper's pretty much foolproof tailplane rigging situation can be a bit of a problem. The other thing to observe is that we've got a total energy head on the leading edge of the fin, and we've got a pitot location on the fin. Okay, Dave, next one. Okay, so which of these is... No,
I've lost sound.
well, I haven't lost voice, so...
Hi, Martin. How you going?
Oh, the right. It's got the total energy in the pitot.
I'm on this.
So which one of those is correct?
Yeah, hey, I managed to answer the phone and still keep watching that, sort of. Okay, see ya.
Okay, so the one on the left is correct. The TE head is plugged in the TE port. The right is obviously wrong because... But note that there are little signs there telling what the particular ports are about. In the Australian litany of errors, there's 2 instances of people getting this particular situation wrong. And in part, in the Schemper gliders, they come new with little bits of pictures, to little tag there to tell you what they're about. But you can lose those tags, or the glider gets refinished and they disappear. So there's a bit of a lesson for daily inspectors and people like Jeff Farrow as a club airworthiness officer. We need a bit more attention to maintaining existing placards and markings, and a tape writing machine is very useful. And then we may find situations where we need to add additional items to the exterior of the glider in particular locations to make things, point to a few things which mightn't need to be detailed. In this case, the glider came with no markings on those locations, and so we put...
Wouldn't it be easier to change the diameter of one of those, of the pitot?
They're both the same diameter. And
Put a slightly smaller tube into the pitot.
Yeah, but if you put a smaller tube into the pitot, and it's like this in the LS3, LS3A, where the pitot is at the top of the fin, the small diameter opening is easier closed over by mud wasps.
I'm not talking. The LS8's
Yeah, like small.
Similar to the LS3, it's just a millimeter smaller diameter. You can't do it.
And Rolf has got a really good point for what he's saying, which is, why don't we engineer our way out of the problem, like for once and for all? I want to keep moving on, but that point that Rolf is pointing to is a really good point, provided you do some engineering which doesn't involve some unwanted, untoward negative aspect. Okay, I'll keep moving on. Sorry, no, I want to stop there. Where the pitot is on the fin leading edge, you're always going to be subject to the possibility of water entering it if you've got the glider parked out overnight and there are rainstorms come through overnight. This has given us problems with the LS3 at Wangaratta on a number of occasions when people haven't protected these locations against water entry overnight. Fortunately, we don't have too much problem with mud wasps down in Victoria, but we have had a mud wasp issue with LS3 on the pitot line, where, yeah, fortunately the puffing proved there's a problem. Next one, thanks, David. Okay, this is from Junior, my gliding club. And so, which is correct? The left-hand side or the right-hand side? Unfortunately, we don't have a voting scheme like at the GFA annual general meeting, so we're deprived of being able to take a vote on it. But which is correct? I'll give you a bit of hint. I'm a bit tired of finding the cushion here on the left in the trailer are not installed in the glider. And when you look at the right, why am I worried about putting the cushion in place?
Well, you can't see whether the main pin is in, or you can't see if the main pin is in and properly clipped in place if the cushion is there.
Yes, but you can move the cushion forward to conduct that inspection, and Lee's got a very good point. But what about, you're going flying for a long flight and you chuck water bottles over the back? There's nothing stopping objects going under the stub spars back into the control. There's nothing stopping objects going over the top of the stub spars into the controls, and that is why the cushion is in place. Now, I haven't been able to establish whether the cushion is part of the parts list for the Junior, but it certainly was present when we bought the glider, and I insisted on being in place. It's easy to pull forward and check the main spar rigging and safety. Okay, next slide, next pair. And this goes to Lee's question, which is correct.
Mm.
Come on, Geelong, come on, you know your stuff, surely.
Bottom's
on, Jeff.
correct. Sorry, the right's correct.
Yeah, the right's correct. It holds the vertical element down into a bit of plywood with a hole in it on the floor. I mean, it's pretty rudimentary.
Oh, yeah, but Roger,
Yep.
people can have that pin through, and they don't have the T-bar actually in that hole.
Yes, that's right. The T-bar might be off the vertical and the bottom might not be in the hole. That's another variation on not being right. I should grab a photo of that. But it is all about just not seeing that there's a safety pin there and then walking on and saying, well, that's got to be right. It's actually about thinking about whether the safety pin is doing its job properly.
If I remember our Junior correctly, none of them is correct. In our Junior, I believe the Fokker pin goes through the main pin.
Well, I must go and have a look at your Junior then.
And the vertical one.
It certainly does, Rolf.
Through the center.
Yes.
And that way, it's safe, up and down.
Yes, in this case, the top of the pin has got a flange, which prevents it from dropping through.
Yes, I understand that. It's safe enough, but I would feel better to have the bore for the Fokker pin through both elements.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll go and have a look at. I'll make a note. I'll go and have a look at the two gliders to see where there's been a variation in factory treatment of these things.
Certainly the Janta has got it through the center.
Yeah, okay. Well, that gives you some homework to do. Happy to do that. Better move on, or we'll never finish by midnight.
The
Yes.
rigging bar.
Certainly the SZD48 goes through the main one. I'm not sure about the Junior now.
Okay, let's roll on, please.
All right.
Let's. Well, they're talking about Jantos. It doesn't get more interesting.
Oh,
Okay, well, here's 4 pictures of the tyre plane rigging on the Junior, and it's in common with the standard as best I know it. And so, which of those has the only one of the 4 is correct? So, which is correct?
Lower right.
It's an insider's job. You should stay quiet.
Sorry.
Obviously, the top left has no safety pin at all. Top right has the safety pin through in a completely inappropriate place. Bottom left has the pin partly forward, and the bottom right is correct. But no, there's not.
In again that I don't regard that as entirely correct either. I would put the Fokker pin from top to bottom, so it can't fall out even if it isn't secured.
You have an excellent point, Rolf, and the reality is that for that safety pin, you can't get it into place from the top down, and it'll be heaps better than it would be. And yes, I should go and check the Junior of Geelong Gliding Club to see whether they've managed to work from top down. I would also point out that I was thinking about it last night and I thought, gee, my recollection of that safety pin is that it's rusty. I was thinking to myself last night, Why the bloody hell are we tolerating a rusty safety pin? You know, the pin should be plated and should be a proper quality aeronautical item. Not, you know, rust leads to things breaking. So
Roger, if I can say something about the orientation of that locking pin.
Yep.
I believe the orientation of the locking pin on XOC is horizontal.
Yeah, like why did? Yeah.
Okay.
And Hamid's got a comment there about designers. Yeah, the designers got to look to answer for.
You understand what I'm saying, Roger?
Yeah, indeed. That there's more reason again to look at
horizontal.
XOC. Okay, we'll keep going on the next one, Dave, which again is about tire planes on this particular junior. Then left is correct as best one can fit, and right is obviously not correct. So let's move on, Dave. We've had enough discussion on this. Okay, and this harness thing is germane, and if you've all paid attention to reading the latest copy of Gliding Australia, you'll find Anthony has written here a very good article on a particular harness issue which has been found and is written up excellently. It applies to a gathering harness, but it's with the Pacific Scientific buckle, but it's also something that you could have happen here. So I'm actually displaying a different problem to the one Anthony displayed. And of course, you're all putting your hands up saying you read Gliding Australia cover to cover and read Anthony's article. And if you can't put your hand up for that, you should be taken out and swung from a yard arm or something like that. Anyway, focusing on the pictures here, what's right, and what's wrong? You tell me.
Right is right, and it's to do with the extra clip point of the buckle. They've placed it in the wrong hole.
Yep. Okay, on the right-hand side, we can see that the strap at the top and the strap at the bottom line up nicely with the line through the manufacturer's symbol, and the two shoulder straps come out at a neat angle. Everything is nice and symmetrical. When we look at the one on the left, things are not symmetrical, and it's for the reason which Lee suggests. We can see that in the right-hand picture, the bottom harness clips in with a nice plastic covering on the item hasn't been disturbed, and it's the bottom strap on the right is actually the one which is permanently attached to the buckle. Someone has put the permanently attached item to the other side, and this means that here there's only the central clip for the fifth aerobatic webbing strap, and the one hole has been used to attach the supposed abdominal strap to the port side wall, and there's a gap there where you could plug in the shoulder strap if things are properly set up. This is quite easy to have happen. Anthony's case related to a person who had the webbing from 2 seats out of a 2-seat glider, and things got mixed up. But there was another trap lying there which caught one of our annual inspectors, which was that the 2 harness sets from the one glider had the always fixed abdominal strap, the one's always fixed to the buckle. It was on one side of the buckle in one seat and on the other side of the buckle in the other seat. And he thought, oh, the fixed strap always attaches to the port side. Well, it wasn't the case. And he didn't. So there's a few more traps with harnesses. And why are harnesses really, really important? And the reason is because they stop people from breaking free under crashing loads. and the accident investigator goes straight to questions of, did the harness do its job? And it's pretty embarrassing to be on the flight line, like I've been twice years ago in my gliding club, and be putting a passenger in the seat, doing up their harness, and having one abdominal strap pull off the wall because the daily inspection was incompetent. Harnesses are really important. Let's keep moving on, Dave.
You can also mess it up, the harnesses in our poo hatch and our junior.
Yeah, they're really important things to get right at DI. Just to make it also not a matter of gliders in my Melbourne Gliding Club. This is Pukats from Canberra. It's really important to check the bottom security at DI, the bottom rudder attachment. It looks very robust, but in fact, at Canberra they have problems with flying in wave conditions with a lot of turbulence off the hills. The rudders on their two Pukats has been slammed around many times, and eventually the loads can get to the stage where you start damaging the plywood. So you're looking for the base of the rudder to be really firm laterally, but also when you're teaching people Pukats, you've got to deal with the matter the rudder cable tension must be maintained, because otherwise the cables will come out of the pulley at the base of the rudder. It's one of the few gliders I know of which has a complete circuit around the whole path, and that circuit is tensioned. Anyway, let's move on.
Sorry, Roger, to check that, what you'd be doing is to hang on to the bottom part of the rudder where it connects to the fin, and check to see if there's any free play for an
move laterally. To remove the fitting, they've undone the bolt at the front, and the bolt will hang on. As it starts to break up, the bolt will still hang on a bit, but the back end will pivot about the bolt. That's what I surmise. It is mostly in the annual inspector's area, but an astute daily inspector might do themselves a favour one day by checking this thoroughly. Let's move on, Dave. Okay, a couple of things from LS3. On the left-hand side, we flew our LS3 one day with the handle of the main spar pin tucked in behind the black knob. And therefore this spar pin on the starboard side engaged through the narrow stub spar and then a fair way into the wide stub spar of the starboard wing. But it didn't fully engage in the stub spar of the starboard wing. The glider was flown in that condition, and instead of delivering a failure load at 11 or 12 G, as most of the early fiberglass gliders have delivered in structural braking tests, it probably was only good for 4, 5, 6 G. Probably would have done a loop okay, but I really wouldn't want to test it at all. We referred this matter to GFA, who referred Toby Geiger. Toby referred it to manufacturer. Manufacturer said, "Oh, can never happen. Never been reported. Can't happen. Not interested." So a minimum step was to put a big sign in there saying the handle goes here. Then I thought about that a few years back and thought, why aren't we bloody well fixing this sort of nonsense so it can't happen at all, which is Rolf Beardler's point. So I bonded in this additional element in narrow aluminium, which prevents you from putting the handle behind the forward side, and had Mike Burns produce that as an approved modification. Otherwise, the glass in the background is just about stiffening the fuselage to stop the gel cut on the outside cracking. It's not important. So we can fix things permanently. And this problem here is probably the same. Oh no, LS4's got tongue and fork, hasn't it? And like 3 stub spars. Yeah, anyway. Other side on the right is simply canopy supports. The canopies stand up there, wave in the wind. It's a hell of a problem for fatigue loads. Eventually at 4,500 hours, this decided to crack right through. The only fix really is to replace the whole item with it, and that's been covered by an engineering order. Let's move on. DG1000s have tail ballast. It's a good scheme, except that at Southern Cross, they succeeded in losing ballast blocks to the countryside. We have done so similarly because we just weren't sufficiently thoughtful about the way things are secured. And so we now teach how this is installed really thoroughly. And we need to keep teaching it all the time and keep emphasising what is required. The rod, which is the plexiglass cover and the rod behind it, inside it, and springs to hold the cover in against air pressure when the whole thing's assembled properly. You push the long vertical rod into the bottom, and then you draw down the spring-loaded pin at the top that's got a taper on it. You then gradually push the bar in at the top, the stage where you can push the telescopic pin up into its hole. And you do that gently because there's, against the far wall, which you can't see in the box, there's a series of rubber rings. If you hit rubber really quickly, it's quite firm, but if you take it slowly, it collapses nicely and it all works beautifully. And then, as the manufacturer says, you tape right around the box and you do it with new tape. In this case, glider was found with a bit of tape across the top. The plexiglass cover was 2.5 to 3 millimetres proud at the top, which is basically bloody hopeless. That's probably enough on that. We might move on. Yeah, this is jumping around a bit, but one thing with the plastic tail wheels on the various gliders listed there, if you only inspect the tail wheel from one side, you're only going to see one part of the problem, and you need to spin the whole, you need to have a look at both sides, and you need to spin the thing around to see that the broken bit isn't hiding at the top but becomes visible. And maybe the problem on the outside might just be simply a crack. But we're asking these plastic tail wheels to do a serious piece of work, and the way the 505 and the DG1000 land, they bang the tail pretty bloody hard. Okay, let's keep moving on. These are just some, this again, grabbing for a few oddball things. Left-hand side shows consequences of parking the glider out at Mount Beauty. We couldn't pack it up. We didn't, for our towing home. We left the tug outside and the glider outside for a week, came back a week later. The boys found the brake boxes were fully saturated with water. They chamoised all the water out. Everything worked, flew home, didn't think about it very much. Then 2 years later, bit by bit, the lever arm on the inboard ends of the air brakes started accumulating more and more looseness at the top, fore and aft. And then that increased, and then you thought, oh, better have a look at this. Dug into the wing, got these items out, found the water had gone through the outer face seal of the bearing into the inside. The bearing on the lower there, where the face seal's removed, most of the balls are completely stuffed or disappeared. The cage has disappeared, and that bearing is about to completely fail. The water's gone through the bearing, gone and corroded the outside of the spacer in between. So that there are a couple of gliders where there are water issues with air brakes, and there is the important requirement of daily inspection to move the top of the air brake paddle at each arm, fore and aft, to check for looseness. Gliders like DG series have basically no looseness. Really important. Very small things sometimes can be desperately important, or at least money-wise. Here's a clip attaching the stay to the little fixture there, and it's bent, so it's not that far off opening up. The canopy's only worth $4,000 plus $4,500 plus $1,500 to fit, plus all the lost revenue. So attention to these small details is bloody important. The other thing I think I'd say, Anthony, is that in reviewing all these incidents and so on, one of the other standout things is the number of times, and it's more operational, the canopies are coming loose in flight. It's really quite startling, and it really prompts my mind to think, well, aren't we able to actually engineer out some of these situations? And DG have tried to do that with the 1000. Anyway, let's roll on. Time is passing. Okay, the DG gliders use a gas strut in the front seat to control the canopy if it happens to be blown shut. It actually is the canopy stay, is a gas strut, not a cable. This detail I'm showing here is really critical. Here we have, and then you'll see this feature in your car. If you go to the bonnet of your car or the boot of your car, you'll see these sorts of gas struts. The ball on the left-hand side is not fully engaged. On the right-hand side, it is correctly engaged. The ball has gone past an internal ring clip. The next slide, which you can go to, Dave, shows on the left that inside the head of the inside there is an internal groove, and fitted into that is something like a circlip, only the item is made out of a spring wire, and so you can push the ball deeper than that ring spring. Then on the right hand side you'll see that these sort of fixtures have a safety in clip. This is not used with the 1000, but the whole idea is in the 1000 is the canopy gets opened and it just breaks away. It won't break away if there's a wire clip like this in place. You can see these wire clips on your car. You will find other circumstances where these sort of gas struts, these sort of connections are used rather. And an example is with the geodiscus engine bay doors, and the Arcus similarly, where the wire clip is essential to making safety because you don't want it to disconnect inadvertently. Then actually the next one, Dave, finishes this sequence, and it shows what the practicality is when it comes to the difference between what's right and wrong actually out in the field inspecting. Left hand is not safe. The ball has not gone past the spring clip. On the right hand side you'll see it. It's so close you can hardly fit a fingernail in there. And yet on the left hand side I've come into the hangar twice and found two DG1000s both like that on the left, both, one of them having been flown that day, and yet and the canopy still opened and closed, didn't fall off, thank Christ. So, there's only, like I say, but somewhere between $5,000 and $6,500 in not breaking the canopy. So some of these small details are really important. That's 18 out of 18. How are we going for time, Dave?
Well, we said we'd take about an hour. We've taken an hour and a half.
Maybe I'll finish up quickly with something out of Australia, just to try and drag it back to Australia, which is the last document.
Oh, okay. My apologies.
Yeah, let's do that. Otherwise, with this idea of the photographs and pairs of photographs, yeah, that was a bit of an experiment, and we are interested in feedback if they want to come back to myself later or Anthony later. We're interested in whether that style of presentation actually works. But anyway, this is a compendium of data inspection issues out of Australia, and it shows that I think we do a bit better than England, but we're not free of problems. Gliding Queensland, Hornet, pilot conducts data inspection of the aircraft against maintenance release for another aircraft. Yeah, well, it's working down VSA, going down the page, Dave. VSA ASW 20, flap disconnection. The whole tell you say to be not engaged. So it can't have been correctly rigged. And a dual inspection was not completed. Okay, let's roll down. South Australia, ASK 21 MI motorised. Evaluation flight, takeoff, second pilot noticed the command pilot of the rear ASI not functioning. Command pilots noticed front ASI under reading. The plumbing had not been restored properly at the annual inspection, and so the huffing and puffing checks, which should detect such things, hadn't done the job. Okay, let's roll on. New South Wales, Twin Oster, ASI under reading. Pitot tube was inspected and found to be blocked by mud wasps. Mud wasps for the northern parts are a serious issue. Command pilot failed to conduct an instrument check, no huffing and puffing. Yep, let's roll on. Next one's from VSA, the DG1000. Yes, here we go. Trim ballast cover fell off. The fin was lost. I think it's actually my gliding club. Yeah, we've talked enough about that. VSA again, LS4A. Pilot noticed airspeed indicator to be flickering wildly. Pilot remained on tow, etc., etc., etc. Post-flight revealed water had entered the pitot system. Aircraft parked out overnight with the pitot-static vents uncovered. So the giveaway on the LS3 at least was when you got water in the pitot, you've got water in the vertical tube in the fin, and the weight of water pushes the needle on the ASI from 0 to something like about 5 knots. So when you walk up and the ASI is sitting on something positive rather than 0, that's a giveaway to one or two problems. Either it's a fin-mounted pitot with water entering into the vertical, through the pitot tube into the vertical part and pressurising a line, or that the instrument is checked by someone who's maybe put their lips over the tube and blown too hard and maybe actually damaged the bellows. VSA Twin Oster, yeah, this was knockout, this one. It's vibration was felt in the control column, etc., etc., etc. And they worked it back to bird droppings along the starboard wing, disturbing the airflow about 115 centimetres from the aileron. And when they cleaned away the bird droppings, lo and behold, the nice flying characteristics of the glider returned. So it's roll on, Dave. I mean, it just shows sometimes the cleaning is not just for one soul, it actually does good in terms of flying qualities. A Saga from Saga, DG1000 again, released to service with an expired maintenance release. The inspector undertaking daily inspection misread the expiry date, etc., etc., etc. Yeah, but it's an important point that does make here. It says, inspector advises that it was unusual for gliders to be left in the hangar when the expired maintenance release, and this led him to see what he expected to see, not what was actually written. And so he had a confirmation bias. He tended to see what he wanted to see or expected to see. Okay, gliding Queensland, Hornet. Yeah, major defect entered in the race list. We'll move on. It's not such a good one, Dave. We'll move on. Gliding Queensland again, Hornet. Aircraft cleared for flight with a major defect of maintenance release. Yeah, I think it's actually the same one. Let's move on. Gliding Queensland has to CS Jeans. Cleared for flight and flown with expired maintenance release. The point's to poor daily inspecting to make this sort of stuff up, but it also means that the person who climbed into the glider to fly it didn't do a very good pre-flight check. Because really, and then quite often instructors have snagged things on the flight line by stepping into the glider, wanting to step into the glider for the first flight of the day and pulling out the maintenance release and checking it usefully. Yeah, well, Gliding Queensland has to see as Jeans. Yeah, I think it's a bit of a repeat. VSA SZD 48-1 Jantar. Yeah, while rigging aircraft following tailplane locking bolt was found to be disengaged. Locking mechanism started to withdraw. So that, you know, it's got a little bit, we'll move on from that. It's not the VSA, you know, PW5, left aileron control linkage unlocked, and it uses a particular kind of sleeve. The next page has a picture. And so maybe with a PW5, if that's in your club, you need, maybe this is one of your 3, 4, 5, 8 issues which you need to draw attention of your daily inspectors to, where you use a picture like this to convey the information, given that a picture can be worth 1,000 words. We'll keep rolling on, Dave. New South Wales Gliding Association, Elan Orion. Aircraft flown to a remote site, person involved rigging the glider unfamiliar with its assembly. Despite independent check following rigging, no one noticed the bolts that secure the main pins were not secured. The aircraft was released to surface. Okay, go down, Dave, and we'll have a look at the picture. This is the way it is with the DG 505, one of which we have Melbourne Gliding Club. Centrally there we can see something which has sprung out and it shows a bit of red around it. The red is to indicate danger. What you're supposed to do with that central item is actually, it's a long threaded bolt, goes right through the whole centre, the main spar pin. It goes back into a fixture in the fuselage socket, and so you screw it in the socket, and eventually when it's tight, you fold the ring over into the little clip on the handle. And this is really important with the 505. It's a change which they instituted because during aerobatics in Germany, they had a wing failure, which you'd think to be impossible, but they succeeded. Both pilots parachuted out okay. And the designer found that they needed to hold both stub spars firmly together because during aerobatics, the thought was that one of the narrow stub spars moved along the pin and started the process where the loads on the pin and the way it's mounted in the stub spars started failing. Anyway, that's for 505 operators. Saga, another Saga from Saga, Grob Twin 2. Daily inspection 2 glider used the wrong maintenance release. They swapped them over inadvertently. Gliding Queensland, ASK 21. Fuselage inspection hatch had been opened and replaced, but not checked for security. So, you know, and then you've got an engine start, and you surely don't want to have a hatch coming loose forward of the propeller system. VSA DG 500M, take a roll, command, pilot mode ASI indicated, 2 slow and airspeed, conditions abandoned launch. Post-flight ASI plumbing inadvertently disconnected during it, earlier maintenance, So the huffing and puffing checks weren't competent. VSA ASK 21. The air brake shut notice the starboard air brake did not deploy. Thereafter, starboard air brake would open and close intermittently without input, so there was a disconnection of control, failure to connect controls. It's and there's a special feature there called Wedigan sleeves. And maybe there's a picture on the next bit there, Dave, about Wedigan sleeves. And I think Wedigan sleeves are relevant to the LS4 in Geelong. Correct me if I'm wrong. But this is a scheme for ensuring that the hotelier coupling, when it's properly engaged, won't inadvertently come adrift in flight. Rolling on, Dave. Just another Saga from Saga. There's lots of Sagas in South Australia, Anthony. You ought to quiet them down somehow. Asta CS.
Actually, it's probably that it's a good reporting culture out of 2 out of the major clubs in South Australia.
That is yeah, go for it.
We find that there's a large percentage of clubs don't actually submit reports, and that when we were looking through all these reports, it was very obvious that these two clubs in South Australia had a very good reporting culture and were the only clubs actually submitting reports from South Australia.
Okay, well, Anthony's entered a perfect defence, and I'm absolutely pushed back into my box. There's quite a few more of these things we can go through, and I'm not sure that we'll gain that much by going to the end of the file. But the file is available, and sometimes it's got pictures. I think we might just finish up on Anthony's general line there, which is that reporting is really important. And I mentioned that the Earless group, which I've been kindly invited to join, pay attention to these matters every second month. You know, apart from Dennis Stacey dealing with service difficulty reports, which come in through the system of reporting, that this group actually reviews all those to see where we've actually maximised what we've learned out of it. But the group is disappointed with the amount of feedback coming out of the field. I mean,